Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Seal.
We're going to talk about being an artist today.
An artist. What does that mean?
Well, it means, what does it mean? That's what one of the things we're going to talk about. What does it mean to be an artist? It means to be, I think, a creator, right? And we're going to talk to Jenny Velarde. Jenny is a psychotherapist, and as she likes to say, she's a psychotherapist, and just as importantly, she's an artist. And she uses this concept of the artist as the guide for transformation and change. And she works with her clients, helping them sort of reignite and reconnect with their own inner artist as the one that will bring them to health and change. And I love this. I'm so excited about it because this is how we're thinking in terms of aging, right?
I agree. I love it. I can't wait to hear what Jenny has to say. So let's talk to Jenny.
Yeah. Okay, so here we are with Jenny Velarde, creator of The Artist as Guide. Don't we love that, Hannah?
I love it. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, ladies. Great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming and talking with us. And we really wanted to talk to you, Jenny, because one of the things that Hannah and I talk about all the time, one of the things that got our head out of complaining about being an older woman into being excited about it was this idea that it could be a creative venture and that we could actually have some part in crafting who we become and what we do as older women. And we like women to even think about themselves as a work of art, right?
Yes.
So in order to do that, you know, I think that that's a leap for a lot of women, not for Hannah and I, of course. but so, you know, for women to consider themselves an artist, to consider, you know, what our culture looks at, you know, aging as something negative and decline and all the other lovely words. It can be a shift. It's a twist to think of it as art. So you're going to show us the way.
I love that. Yeah. You know, something I think maybe a great place to start. I see the artist role as a real industrial strength role. It's one of those roles that it's such a hardy role, and it's a role that can take on so much. It's so incredibly versatile. And I think that sometimes maybe culturally we kind of designate it to being on the fringe or being in the corner or kind of being something that comes in when we have, you know, the time or we have a little bit of extra money, or it's kind of like an extracurricular. And the way that I'm hearing you describe it in applying it to aging is that it's a role that's at the foundation. It's a rooting role versus kind of a periphery role. So I love that. It's really cool.
So how do we get to that though? I think, you know, you hear I'm not creative. I don't know how to be creative. It's an indulgence I've never spent time in. It's not practical. I have practical needs.
Yes.
You know, how do you get to that?
Oh, everything that you just said is absolutely at the heart of it. And it's so interesting hearing those statements because you're exactly right. That's what holds us back from stepping into the artist role.
Right.
And shockingly, I think it's just the opposite. So I think the first step is redefining what we think of as an artist. So I often talk about kind of the stereotypes. The first step I really think is taking on the stereotype of what we assume the artist is. So we could even do it right now in terms of thinking, okay, see the word artist in front of you, what comes to mind? And oftentimes it can be a very flowery role that pops up into a
special person, a special person, a special person who was like gifted from the gods, some special power.
I was just thinking gifted. Exactly.
Yep. Some type of ethereal space. I often talk about the muse, like the muse floating in and floating out. And it can get to a place where it feels almost fantasy-like and intangible and kind of slipping through our fingers.
Intangible, definitely. I hear that a lot. Yeah, that's not me, and it never will be me. Right.
Right. Right. And if it is me, it's just on occasion when I'm lucky enough for inspiration to come knocking, but it's fleeting. That's something I hear often too, of like, well, I would do it more often, but I'm just not inspired all that often. So it's one of those roles that I think we're kind of unconsciously trained to wait on it, to sit and wait, around and hope that it shows up.
Right. Exactly. Like it's special. It's going to like lightning bolt is going to come and change everything.
Yeah. I wonder why. Why? I know this isn't, maybe this isn't where you want to, but that makes me wonder why. Because I know what you say, Jenny, and it's what I believe also, that we are born to create, right? It's our, it's our birthright. And so how did it become something that we don't see that way? We don't see as our birthright. We see it as something that only special people or tortured people or all these other stereotypes, right, get access to. I want to answer the question for myself almost right now, like maybe it's economics, right? Or something like, I remember Brene Brown realizing that in her, work, that she realized, oh my God, being an artist is like wholehearted. She was studying who has this quality she called wholehearted living, and they're creative. And she always thought that was like a waste of time. Like she always says, like, I'm sorry, but I have a job, right? So this sort of separation between our survival and our creating, there's like some schism there.
Yeah, right. Definitely. I think by you bringing up wholehearted living, I wonder if there's maybe a little guilt or a little shame in that of, when you're steeped in it, when you're situated firmly in it, it can feel so aligned and so natural and so fluid that I wonder if we're taught that when you're in that space, there should be a little bit more hardship, or work shouldn't be so comfortable or attuned. Right. Work should have grit or difficulty to it.
Yeah.
So when you say, think about what does artist mean to you, do you find that people think fine artist, that they think competitive, that they think product and producing something versus a way of living and a way of being, which is something, I think that for me would be helpful to understand. What creativity and artistry can be in anything you do. It doesn't mean that you need to go to become a, portrait artist.
Absolutely.
Correct? I mean,
yes. And that's through Artist's Guide. That's kind of one of the key tenets, is that it's a role that's accessible to everybody. It has very practical applications in every single part of our lives, and it's a non-negotiable role. So it's not something that's just for luxury. It's something that can be it's brass tacks and can be kind of in movement and hit the ground running in any part of our lives. So Hannah, that actually makes me think about part 2. Once you address the stereotype, then redefining, okay, what is this role in my life? And when I think about the artist role, the first thing that really comes to mind to me is that it's a problem-solving role. It's a creative problem solver. It's one of those roles that can kind of go in and examine a situation and try a lot of different options, outcomes, take things and turn it on its head. It's one of those roles that yokes in curiosity. And when curiosity is really buzzing and really rich and full, that's where you can get some solutions to challenges that maybe have kept you stuck or in a place of rigidity for a long time. So I love this idea of seeing the artist role as a role that rolls up sleeves and just goes in and takes on situations that maybe other roles would see as too difficult to take on.
I just love that. It's interesting. To me, it's changing the meaning of the word artist, and not making it so precious, and making it
Yes.
part of who we are, and that everyone has that is just a beautiful concept.
Ugh, precious is such a huge word for it. I did a video about preciousness and how when we make our artistry so precious, we're actually starving it. We're actually keeping it incredibly small, and we're not allowing it to just move in the way that it naturally wants to move. We're holding it back.
So, Jenny, how did you come to this? And what do you? I know you use this as a part of your work, and so I guess it's a 3-part question. How did you come to it? How do you use it in your work? And what are you really? What are you really going for? Like what What do you want to see happen with this? With this, your philosophy, your.
It's great. So I'll kind of take on the 3 parts, and they lead into each other. So I think thank you for asking those 3 questions. I really think that Artist as Guide started with my upbringing, with my parents. So I'm the oldest of 4 kids, 4 artists, and my parents were teenagers when they had me. So they were kind of gangly youth, like wide-eyed artist teenagers. And man, they didn't have anything, these kids, they really were just kids, and they were finding their way, and we were poor as all hell. And I think though we had very little, something we were very, very rich in was their hope and their belief in creativity. And it's almost like, because we had so very little, it made the space there was so much expanse for opportunity and for just rich, wild imagination to kind of fill in the story and lead and guide the story. So I think that's honestly where Artist as Guide began, watching my parents use the artist role in a very practical way to get us through, to get food on the table, to keep a roof over our heads. They really put use to this role, very practical applications. So that's where I think that was the genesis of it. And I've used it ever since. I mean, it's been a role that's gotten me through a lot of tricky situations, and kind of helped me to flourish in difficulties. So that's the genesis of it. And being a psychotherapist, so I started working in private practice in 2013, and I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of artists, a lot of professional artists, and I see the same Rolodex of challenges come up time and time again with my clients. And here's what I typically notice. With my clients, it feels very isolative. It feels very like they're the only ones experiencing it. It feels almost like pathologized. So the typical things that come up for artists, so self-doubt or jealousy, or feeling like other people are more advanced than you, or wondering, did I make a mistake going into this shift? Should something more practical? All these types of things that have probably plagued artists since the beginning of time. I think they can make us feel like we're the only one experiencing it. And it can lead to devastating outcomes. I mean, if we were to kind of push it to the furthest extent, I don't think it's any wonder, I don't think it's any coincidence that there, there have been so many cases of suicide with artists throughout the generations, because it can be a very intense space to be in. And if there isn't a greater dialogue around the fact that, yes, these are things that are embedded in the role of the artist. These are not pathologized things that are just what you're experiencing. These are things that it comes with the territory.
Right. Right.
So in that way, I think it's important to have these dialogues, just so that it's almost like thinking of it like if you were a construction worker, or if you were an engineer or an electrician, hazards of the occupation, hazards of the job, thinking about these things in that way versus this is a shortcoming of my self-worth.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Okay. And so then how did you come to seeing this idea of it being a guide in a practical sense, in an everyday, every activity sense?
I think the more I really honed into this with clients, rather than seeing it as something that just occasionally came up in sessions that we gave a little airtime to, but kind of honing it more and focusing more on it with my clients very actively, I started to notice real mobilizing shifts with my clients, where the more that we focused on this role and the more that we gave a lot of care to it, all of a sudden things were shifting in their lives that maybe previously we had kind of been going around in circles on. So it was through watching my clients take on the artist role very proactively that I really saw, okay, this has, going back to the idea of practical application. So for example, this person is applying it to their marriage, or this person is applying it to the boss that they've been struggling with for the past 6 years, or this person is applying it to their kids, working with their daughter or their son, seeing how effective it can be. That's what really motivated me to think, all right, we need to make this repeatable and kind of put a dialogue around it so that it can be named and spoken about with greater ease.
I just love this idea. I think it's really making me think about how it shifts the sense of identity and focus and perspective by changing the guide, bringing forth a guide who looks through this different lens, right?
Is that what you mean by
conceptualizing it?
guide? A lens, the way you see things, the way you. So I think it'd be really fun to have a couple examples. Like maybe we could just imagine, right? I mean, you could give real examples, or we could just imagine, like, suppose somebody came to you, Jenny, and this person is, feels like she doesn't have, any really meaningful relationships. She's feeling lonely. She's feeling isolated. How could the artist help her?
Well, that's a great because it's an example that is very common, and it often comes into the therapy room. So that would be a situation of getting really playful, getting really I often say, okay, let's throw as much content into the room as possible. We're going to kind of mosaic together your thoughts and your feelings. Let's get everything thrown into the room and let's see what we can kind of create out of it. So in that situation, so somebody who may feel really isolative in terms of their relationships, we might explore different aspects of, fear of what is keeping the person in a space of isolation, kind of exaggerating the fear, playing with the roles in terms of caricaturing the fear, really, kind of expanding things and blowing things up and seeing things from different angles. So by just almost taking the story and being able to step into the story as if we were writing a script or writing a fairy tale or building out a hero's journey. When you can start to do that, there's mobility, there's movement there, and you can start to build in the narrative that perhaps you would like to try on for yourself. So it offers permission to have a little bit more permeability in something that might feel really fixed.
I love that. And I already have lots of images, but I can imagine even a client coming to any of us and they say like, I have no friends, I have no relationship, I'm lonely. And then, I love this idea of like making art out of all the fears, all the worries, all the limitations, like whether it's a visual mosaic or a story or a hero's journey. But how many times does the client or could possibly say to us, I don't want to do this, I want to fix the problem. I don't want to play with it. I want to fix it. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
I think I have a way of working in which we kind of move into it kind of nonchalantly. Oh.
Sneaky, Jenny. You're kind of sneaky, you're saying.
A little sneaky. And that's part of the artist role too, is that it meets you where you're at. It doesn't, and this is something, I think this is such an important point. So when I think of the stereotype of the artist role, I think of, we're drama therapists. So I think of a lot of scarves. I think of like a paint palette with paint neatly laid out on the palette. I think of like a canvas sitting there on the easel. Some of these more, these symbols that are kind of drilled into our unconscious idea of what the artist is. And they tend to be symbols that kind of make us yawn or gag, or like this idea of like, I don't want to do that. Come on, please. No, I'm like that. I mean, oftentimes, if I step into a workshop and some of these symbols are there, it's just like, oh, I don't want to do this. Please, please. So I totally hear this, Cecilia. But so I think it is there is a little bit of savvy and a little bit of sneakiness with the artist too, of like, okay, but like the speakeasy notion of, but really, come on in the door and let's really kind of get down to business. Yeah. And that's part of it too, of letting the role match the person where they're at, even when where they're at is the place of the last thing I want to do is make thing right now. The last thing I want to do is create. The last thing I want to is be playful right now.
Yeah. We get that. We do workshops and, the women are coming in for solutions, right? Like, I want to know what to do next, right? And Hannah and I have them like, do a little improv and the first feeling and look we get is like, what?
It's like deer in headlights.
This isn't what I came here for, right? Right. And it's so interesting, isn't it? So we just want to be like, I have the same thing. Like we want to be fed the answer, but the journey, the process has to do with a little bit of letting it go, a little bit of play, a little bit of rearranging, and that's the artist.
Yeah. But it's stretching those muscles that just haven't been used in a long time in many people's cases. Everybody's had been creative and played and done things and imagined. It's just that we haven't nurtured that part of ourselves. So I think people, once they trust and get ready and start to move, kind of go, oh, this feels good.
Oh, we always get that feedback, always.
Yeah.
But Hannah and I, we have that first, it's like that gap in between when we get them going. It's like, are they going to leave the room? Right? It's that like, what? And it's so interesting to me, isn't it? Because we just have evolved as a species by being artists, by being creators, yet we downplay it as the thing that we need to do most. It's such a, it's such an interesting paradox.
Well, because it's unfortunate, and I'll pitch my belief about education, but they've moved away from, or at least in some, funding arts programs and things that would stimulate creativity, and it's sort of rigidity in writing and expectations and exams and meeting these markers that doesn't teach people that there can be, you don't have to write a poem that rhymes, and you don't have to, you can play and experiment and explore, and there's unfortunately, there's not a lot of room for it,
Yeah.
Well, that's what Jenny says. Jenny, you say on your website and with your YouTubes, like, art is not a luxury. It is not a luxury. It's a survival tool.
Yes, that's right.
I love that you say that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think, if I were dropped in the middle of nowhere, out in the desert somewhere, if I were dropped in the middle of nowhere, and I only had one role to pick to kind of lead me through literal survival, I would totally pick the artist, because it is those roles that's very innovative. It thinks on its feet. It uses what resources it has around it. I mean, it's just so it's a role, and it's a scrappy role. It's a role that can make something out of very little. And I really honestly feel like it would be a role that would help you figure out how to create a fire in the middle of nowhere, or get food, or get water. It really is one of those type of roles. And that's how this idea, Cecilia, of it being a survival tool, looking at it from that space, as opposed to, oh, maybe one day I will, maybe one day when I'm retired, I will take up watercolor, shift. And that's great too. But this idea of shifting it from that one day space, like one day when I have a little bit more luxury of time under my belt, to I need it right now, because man, oh man, am I in conflict with this and that and the other. And I need it to kind of buddy up with me and get me through this.
Right. It's interesting. When I have clients who are very stuck and rigid, sometimes I'll just say, okay, your assignment is to find 3 things to take a picture of with your phone on the way here.
Oh,
just to kind of say, open up that window of looking at it differently, looking for something that surprises you, looking for something to start to begin to kind of see if we can pry open that door a little bit,
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. And it's isn't it shocking what can come from a directive like that? I mean, truly little directives like that. I love seeing what clients do with those type of directives. It shocks me every time. It's just, it opens into entire world. I love that.
Yeah, well, that's so. If we were to break down what is an artist is someone who observes, right? Like in using all the senses, I guess. And then there's the imagination piece, which is what we talk about all the time. Like, one of the things I think, since we're talking about twisting the plot for women over 50 all the time here, one of the things that gets in our way is our lack of imagination about who we could be, or what it could look like, or what, imagining it different than anything we could know, right? It's so hard. Sometimes I've done a couple talks where I ask women to even imagine what it could be, what women could do, what could be their purpose. And every now and then, thank God, there's like someone really creative in the room that like is able to leave the box of reality and say, like, whatever, we could become sea creatures, and because it takes that leap for then everybody, because what they're saying instead is, volunteer at a soup kitchen. I'm like, no, let's go further. Let's imagine, right? It could be more than being a grandmother, or if you're going to be a grandmother or caretaker, how could you do that? Like, so the artist, yes.
I was just going to say, I find people even more than just like the soup kitchen thing, just blank. Absolutely blank.
Yes.
Because thinking about the future only means death and decline, and they don't want to look at it. So they see nothing. They see absolutely nothing. They just draw blank.
Right.
And that makes me sad, because I think Seal's onto something. It's about trying to push the boundaries of imagination.
That's right. And, I'm even like writing something now because I read this article and they kept talking. It was a positive article about aging, but they kept referring to how to see, how to deal with decline, I'm like, why do we even call it decline? What a loss of imagination there. So so you can't think the same. You can't walk the same. You have some eyesight. Like, we call this all decline. But couldn't we call it something else? Couldn't we call it evolution, transformation, something else? I don't know. So we need the artist. We need the artist to help us like carve out a new runway for what it could be when we're 60, 70, 80, 90, like even imagine into our hundreds. Everyone I tell, you could live to be 100. Their first response is, oh, please. Oh my God. Like, shoot me now, because they don't have an imagination about what it could be. They only think of illness and, dependency. And so I guess I'm going to turn it back to you now, Jenny. Help us. How do we, suppose Hannah and I are your clients and we're coming to you saying, we can't imagine our futures. We don't know what to do. We're worried. We have to have surgeries. We feel chubby. We feel invisible. We don't, we don't know. We can't get jobs. We're lost. What would you do?
Well, as you both were talking, something came to my mind, and this is kind of a side way of answering the question, but I'll bring it back around. I've been very, very blessed to work with so many clients, older adults, including Holocaust survivors of the Holocaust. 4 years in a program called Witness Theater, where we created therapeutic theater from the stories of adults who had lived through the Holocaust. And I cannot, I think when I think of aging, I think of their experiences, because my gosh, I don't think that I've met, and this is kind of just, I'm speaking in kind of a general sense here, but I don't think I've met more vibrant, technicolored, innovative, bigger dreaming people than this group of people that I worked with in terms of the Holocaust. And not only did they model to me that life gets richer the older that you get, life gets fuller, life gets more seasoned and more joyful, and it expands. Not only that, but they really taught me that this idea of imagination is it's imperative to imagine fully at whatever age you are, at 80, 900. I mean, the oldest client that I've ever worked with, it was 102. And she, the most playful, imaginative, she was just bursting with life. And so I've had very, very good models for what it means to get older. And in fact, when I think about getting older, I think about getting less serious. I mean, oh my gosh, sometimes I get so irritated with myself about, I take myself so seriously, and I look at these fantastic models where they're not doing that. And man, are they radiant, they are shining. So I guess to bring it all the way back around, with age, with comes more room to move, more room to shake off the crap that's put on us kind of culturally, more room to just be more clever, more, just.
Yeah. So you tell us first to shake the crap off.
I would totally say shake the crap off for sure. Oh my gosh. And I do say that to clients constantly. Before we started recording, Cecilia, you brought up a great point about the time clock for the artist, like the looming time clock of, oh my gosh, I'm this age, and if I don't become an actor in film by this age, I've failed.
Exactly.
And that's a big thing for the artist. And I constantly say this to clients of, I hear you, I validate what you're saying. And man, oh man, I'm sorry, but that's just a massive myth. I'm sorry. It's just a huge myth.
Yeah. Yes, a lot of myths, right? We hear that all the time. I say it to myself, like, well, the clock, it's too late. It's too late to do something huge, right?
Right.
Yeah, we have to work on that. So the first thing would be shake it off. The first use of the artist would be to shake it up, because that's what artists do, right? They rearrange things.
Yeah. Yep, they really do.
Deconstruct. Yeah.
Right.
And then what?
And then the rebuild. You do the deconstruct, and then you start to rebuild. And if you start to rebuild and you're not totally crazy about it, you deconstruct again and So it's just that feeling loose in dismantling and building, and just seeing what comes of it.
That's so interesting. It makes me. It's because it's process. Then it's about the process of the building. It's like if you saw a kid play with blocks, they don't build one thing with blocks and then leave it forever. They knock it down and build again, and it's in the process of learning. So I love that.
And there was that study, Hannah, that I wrote about in the book that we're working. I don't remember who did it exactly, but they gave this music box to a group of adults and a group of children. Do you know this study, Jenny? And it was a music box that they had to figure out how it worked, but it didn't work in any what do you want to call it? Way that you would instinctive way, right? Yeah, intuitive. That's the word. So the adults couldn't figure it out, but the children, like little 4-year-olds, figured it out quite quickly, actually, because they didn't go at it with the same idea, the same expectation, the same, this is how things should work. And they just played with it. And they figured it out. Yeah. So that's what it is. They dismantled their ideas. They didn't have them. So we as adults, to get back to that childlike thinking, have to just sort of get rid of it. Everything we know, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's what we hear all the time. Let go of everything you've learned so far and try something new.
I remember I worked at a nursing, long-term rehabilitation nursing facility in Bed-Stuy. And I remember a client once told me, it's not about being childish, it's about being childlike. Mm-hmm. That notion of childlike brain can be it really can be a maverick, kind of getting to the bottom of something pretty fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So, what else, Jen? What else do you want us to know about your artist as guide work and that you think is super important that you've learned along the way? This is great what you're telling us. It's so important.
I guess the last thing I would say is if there's anyone listening to this that really kind of feels knocking at their heart when it comes to their artist role, to maybe to suggest just a little time sitting with the role kind of quietly and just in stillness and letting the role say what it needs, because I really believe that the creative part of us, if we slow things down enough, it's going to let us know what it needs and how to get there. But I think oftentimes we cram it out. We overstimulate ourselves so much, especially now, sometimes when we feel the knocking of creativity on ourselves, we'll then turn to Facebook or Instagram or something to fill up the time. And it's devastating to the artist role. It really is devastating that we are cramming up our time with these very quick stimulative kind of stimulation places that are ready. I mean, they are always ready to take our time from us. So I would say if there is something knocking at your heart in terms of creativity, give yourself what's white noise time to just sit with it. Let it speak to you in the white noise.
So take some time to listen and have listen to yourself, listen to your own artist within.
Yeah. Sorry to add one more thing. This is something I say to clients all the time. Be willing to wrestle with it, because it's not be kind of a glorious, enchanted path necessarily. You might have to get down on the mat and just wrestle. And that's process, and that's a good sign. When you're having to wrestle with your artist role, there's good stuff there.
I love that. I'm going to get down and wrestle.
Yeah, I'm going to wrestle with you as soon as we finish. But I think this is so important. I feel like this is like the essence of what we really want. Like, this is a plot to twist, right? Like we don't, instead of, I don't know who we naturally follow as our little inner guide when we're aging. Fear, I think. Fear, dread, practicality, concerns about our medical, this and that. Like all the things that, I guess, we've seen our own people we know who are older follow. Instead, pull that artist forward. Just pull her out. Pull her forward and let her shake it up and play and imagine and have fun and create something different, it's very exciting.
It's exciting.
It is. Jenny, thank you.
Thank you, guys. You guys are awesome. And I'm just so amazed by what you're building and what you're doing. And thank you so much.
No, thank you, Jenny. Really great.
Feel the same way about you and your work. Definitely. Absolutely. We will put your Artist's Guide information for people to get in touch with you and learn more about you and see your amazing videos. We'll put it on the
in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Art is not a luxury. It's a tool for survival.
I just think that's great. It really, Jenny really changed how I think about the work I do also as a therapist, in that I dance around this, but I don't think I actually have ever conceptualized the artist as a guide, and it will really shift my work. I just think that's amazing.
Look out. No, I agree. I'm very excited about this. I love this idea that imagination, play, seeing things differently, reconceiving, building something up and dismantling it, building it up again, is the way for us to recreate who we can be in the world.
Exactly. And it's just a gift for aging. I think it's a gift of a way to think about aging. So I think it's great.
Get in touch with Jenny. Look at her videos. They're amazing. They're so well done.
Yeah.
And she's just got so much to offer. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you for listening to this podcast of Twisting the Plot. You can help us inspire women by sharing this podcast with friends.
Or how about giving us a review on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts?
To learn more about us, visit our website at twistingtheplot.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.
Pinterest?
No, not yet.
Snapchat.
Come on.
How about MySpace?
Oh, God. We're everywhere.
Together we can twist this plot.